Today on This Week in Space, Who is Q? We visit with John de Lancie.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 38, recorded November 18th, 2022. Who is Q? With John de Lancie. This episode of This Week in Space is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Secure your family's online activity and unlock tons of new shows by visiting expressvpn.com/twists. Take back your online privacy today and use my link to get 3 extra months free with a 1-year package. Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Space, the Who is Q edition. I'm Rod Pyle, Editor-in-Chief of Ad Astra Magazine, and I'm joined, as always, by the unflappable Tariq Malik, Editor-in-Chief of Space.com. Hello, Tariq.
Hello, Rod. Hello, Rod. How are you doing today?
I'm thrilled, more than usual even, because we're here today with one of our favorite actors, John de Lancie, who has brought us his formidable talents. Such shows as Breaking Bad, Days of Our Lives, Battlestar Galactica, Stargate SG-1, Torchwood, and of course, as the incomparable Q in many iterations of Star Trek. Hello, John. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Hello.
So I was going over some of your acting reels on YouTube, some highlights earlier in the week, and I just have to make this observation that you're aging better than Sean Connery did even, which is something I've always aspired to and am so far failing miserably to do. So congratulations. Must have something to do with good living.
That's a very nice compliment. And it's all the monkey enzyme injections I take. So there you have it.
Hopefully that's not monkeypox. All right. So before we embark on our adventure into the continuum, a Star Trek joke, because I simply must. A stormtrooper and a red shooter in a room. The stormtrooper shoots the red shirt but misses every shot. The red shirt dies anyway. Bum. I think I may have used that in one of our beta episodes, but yeah, it's a polite rim shot. All right, let's move right on. Tariq, update us on. We had a magnificent Artemis launch.
Yeah, after months and months of going back and forth, Rod, about when or if or whether NASA's Artemis 1 moon rocket, now the world's most powerful rocket, ever. NASA did it. They successfully launched the Artemis 1 mission to the moon. In fact, it's on its way. It's doing well. Everything is going perfectly. I am flabbergasted, but the Space Launch System rocket aced its first test flight, 322 feet, 8.8 million pounds of thrust, more powerful than the mighty Saturn V, and it did its job perfectly. You made a red shirt joke earlier. During the countdown, they had a fuel leak. They sent 3 guys in on the red crew out there under a fully fueled rocket to actually tighten down some bolts and stop that leak. They saved the mission. It was spectacular. So I have no words. We spent a lot of time criticizing the rocket, but when push came to shove, they got it off the ground. No one wins the Star Trek chair, but I did lose a bet with the entire Space.com staff. I owe everybody Girl Scout cookies. Rod, you can get in on that. I will send you some Girl Scout cookies too. Absolutely. John, also, if you would like some, I'll send some to you too. Everyone should celebrate.
So, John, did you see the launch?
Might I say, on your way to a longer life, don't eat the Girl Scout cookies.
Did you see the launch, John?
I didn't. I read about it, though. Very exciting. I love that stuff.
It was, I felt like,
excuse me.
I think I've got a new name for people our age. We're the bookenders, because we saw this the first time out with Apollo, and now we're seeing it again finally. And, they used to call us the orphans of Apollo, but I prefer to be called a bookender because we were here sort of at the Alpha, and, well, the Omega is probably a bad choice of words, but we're here to see it happening again, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. Very exciting.
And I would just point out the Orion spacecraft is doing well on its way to the moon. It will return to Earth on December 11th, so we should all be looking out for that. And if the readers or listeners are interested, they can track it through NASA's Where is Artemis? They just you can see it in real time. What's going on there?
And I have an update. If you want a good summary article, I pointed you last week in our big Starship SLS comparison discussion to the National Space Society's website, nss.org. where you can download a wonderful article written by one of my writers on Ad Astra, John Cross. I checked that after I put that on the podcast, and there was a little bit of a glitch on the website. So if you go there now and click, and it'll ask you for your email, it'll then immediately send it as a PDF to your email, but you won't see an indication of that on screen. We have a bug we're working out, but it's a good article. So if you're interested in some deeper material, go for it. So, John, you've got a great story, which I think people would love to hear, about how you got the seminal role of Q. And for anybody who has been living under a rock for 50 years and has not seen John in Star Trek: The Next Generation, it's a character that's kind of hard to describe, but you play an omnipotent being who tests but secretly seems to admire the captain of the Enterprise over many, many episodes. But that role almost didn't happen because of a long-distance flight, as I recall.
Yes. I was in the process. I was working on a play at the time at the Mark Taper Forum, and I got a call and to audition for Star Trek, which I did. And then they said, well, now I was interested as to when it was that they were going to start, and they were going to start when I was, in fact, in production on the play. So I said, you know what, I don't think this is going to work out. And they said, well, we are willing to change your shooting time so that instead of you being with us for a month, you'll be with us for two weeks, the last 2 weeks. But you have to be back on a Monday, and that's a deal breaker. And I went, oh, well, now I need to find out when the last show is. Well, the last show of this play that I was doing, which was called Terra Nova, was on Sunday. Everything so far so good, except it was Sunday in Tokyo. And I went, well, that's it. That's the end of the story. And my wife, who was overhearing all this, kept whispering, or started to whisper, the international dateline, the international dateline. And lo and behold, magic. I got on a flight at 6:00 in the afternoon on Sunday in Tokyo and was back magically at, I don't know, whatever time it was, 11 o'clock at night on Saturday. So I was able to be on the set at 6 a.m. on Monday. And that's how that was the, that clinched the deal.
All right, great. Well, that's an amazing story. It kind of takes logistics of travel to the extreme there. I was curious, John, what you wanted to bring then to the role there? I mean, is it pretty much just you on the page there, or were you really trying to define what really became an iconic character across not one, but I think about 5 different incarnations of the series over time, not to mention all of the tie-in books and games and whatnot for that?
No, I mean, I didn't know that this was going to become kind of the tomato that stuck on the wall by any stretch of the imagination. And so my intent at the time was to simply do as good a job as possible. The irony is that sometimes in terms of typecasting, you wouldn't do it any other way, and yet at the same time you think to yourself, gee, boy, you end up getting yourself typecast sometimes. I did not play him as a god, or I didn't think of any of those things. If anything, if the closest that I could say is that he was an omnipotent being who was too stupid to know it. So it was whatever was on the page, and then the contradictions that I added to that to simply kind of give a dimensionality and a sense of depth to the character. But knowing any of this, not for a moment. And as a matter of fact, 2 or 3 days into shooting, I was watching a setup, and 2 or 3 days back then meant that the dailies had time to be processed and to come in, at which point Roddenberry kind of snuck up behind me, and a voice behind me said, "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." And I turned around, and it was Gene, and I took it as a compliment. He was being nice. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Oh, you will find out." And he was giving me more than just a compliment. He was giving me a little bit of insight into the world that for the last 30 years has continues to reveal itself to me.
So a question about, you were talking about putting your individual touches on the role. My understanding is that the scripts were pretty tightly controlled in terms of ad-libbing. So was this something you added verbally, or just the way you interpreted the character in your actual performance?
It's the way in which you interpret. If you do not bring yourself to the role, if there are 10 people in the room and there's one role, you are going to look to the person who brings themselves to the role. And so if you do not do that, then it's not really your role. So you have to bring yourself to it. And that's what I did. And it isn't as if you dial that in, you go, well, I'm going to bring 80% of myself to this role, or, what have you. You can feel it in the material. If the material speaks to you in a way that speaks to you, and that then that's great. And I've had many a role that I've gone, oh God, I mean, this could be played by anybody, and it doesn't speak to me. And the problem is that I oftentimes will not do a very good job, nor will any actor do a very good job at that point if the role doesn't speak to them.
So I first had the good fortune to meet you at a conference in Des Moines called CI Live, and that was a very fun evening. And we were talking about this a little bit, and one thing, I don't remember the exact wording, but I think you told me that there were elements of your personality in Q. I think you might have used the word snarky at one point.
I'm sure. I'm sure. I mean, there's an arrogance. There's not only is there what's on the page, and then that gets filtered through my own, kind of complicated personality, but then I allow myself, quite frankly, quite literally, I have done all my homework, and I know, which way I generally want to go, but I load sort of everything up into RAM, and that gives me the option of being able to sort of stay at an improvisatory level, because then it just is all the information coming in, how Patrick is behaving, or how Brent is behaving, or how any of those guys are behaving. And I allow myself, one of the things which I think is actually a Q-like characteristic, is that, it's however he rolls out of bed in the morning. It's just, there's a indulgence of, he's willing to emotionally indulge or he's willing to indulge his emotions, without any problems. He's shameless in that respect. So I try to include that.
There was a story that you told on an interview I was looking at, speaking of improvisation, where you're having, I think it was your first square off with the Guinan character played by Whoopi Goldberg, and you kind of had a cat's paw curse moment there. Can you tell me about that? Because that was a great story.
Well, that's one of those things, is that, and this happens in, quite frankly, almost every creative endeavor. There's a lot of practicality that goes into writing a script, into producing a show, and costuming. Well, the robe didn't show up, so why don't you wear this blanket? I mean, it's just, you just have to keep rolling, you just have to keep moving. And in this case, I remember very distinctly going, God, this scene is just not a great scene. And if we can't change the words and we're ready to shoot, so we're not going to rewrite it, then it's a matter of giving it spin. So if you can give the scene a little bit of spin, you might be able to get past the bumpy parts. And that's exactly how that happened. A cross, vampire, like, oh, don't get near me, and oh, don't get near me, and stuff like that. And it wasn't meant for anything other than a shiny moment, a little mirror, a little, what do you call it? Deflection in there. But people have jumped on that as if that were some thought of for, months beforehand. It actually was thought of milliseconds before we started shooting.
Well, that's a fun story and one of hundreds of those kind of moments, I'm sure, in your acting career. But I have to say, I remember watching it the first time out and thinking, I didn't expect that. So that was a lot of fun. We will be back with Tariq's next question as soon as we take this short break. This episode of This Week of Space is brought to you by ExpressVPN. We all know how ExpressVPN protects your privacy and security online, don't we? But here's something you might not know. You can also use ExpressVPN to unlock movies and shows that are only available in other countries. If you're like me and you've run out of stuff to watch on Netflix, even having gone through all the Star Trek franchise shows, this will change your world. You can use ExpressVPN to binge shows like The Office, Friends, or Parks and Recreation on the UK Netflix, Vikings or Fargo on the Canadian Netflix, or Rick and Morty on the Australian Netflix. It's just so simple to do. I fire up the ExpressVPN app, change my location to the UK or whatever country I want to access, and refresh Netflix, and that's it. ExpressVPN lets you control where you want sites to think you're located, so you can choose from almost 100 different countries. Just imagine all the Netflix libraries you can go through. If you love Korean dramas, use ExpressVPN to watch Parasite off the South Korean Netflix. But it's not just Netflix. ExpressVPN works with any streaming service: Hulu, BBC, iPlayer, YouTube, you name it. There are hundreds of VPNs out there, but the reason I choose ExpressVPN to watch these shows is because it's ridiculously fast. There's never any buffering or lag. You can stream in HD with no problem. ExpressVPN also works on all your devices: phones, media consoles, smart TVs, and more. You can watch what you want on the big screen or on the go. I've been using ExpressVPN for months now, and I have to say, among the software packages that I've tried like it, it is by far the easiest to install and the simplest to use. You just download it, click a button, and you're on and ready to go. And that's a real pleasure for somebody who's moderately technologically aware like myself. So give ExpressVPN a try and see what you think. I think you'll love it. So if you want to get access to hundreds of new shows, go to expressvpn.com/twists. That's expressvpn.com/TWIS right now. And you can get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. That's expressvpn.com/TWIS. expressvpn.com/twists to learn more. And we're back. Tariq.
Great. Yeah. I really wanted to ask John, you mentioned, of course, that you were doing a play prior to the role there. And I know that you trained at Juilliard, and I was very curious about how that classical theater training helps you inform, or I guess create a character like you or any other role that you have taken on in your career. I mean, is it a bedrock foundation, or do you have to start anew with each role as it comes in to kind of define what you're hoping to portray from the script there?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question, but it's also a huge question and a complicated question. Every actor will have a kind of a version of their own answer. one of the things that going to a drama school will provide you with is a lot of experience with text. And text usually means being able to deal with complicated word structures and stuff like that. It also means that you have your focus and your understanding of what's going on usually has to do with what the scene is about. I had somebody who said to me, somebody very close to me who made the comment to me. She said, John, I think there are two types of actors, one who illuminates the scene and the other who illuminates the character. I illuminate the scene. I'm of the opinion, and what has worked for me, and that is that there is a part of me, be it tiny, that I have to go searching for, or very big, that is, like rolling off a log, that is the character. And I just need to find that part of me that is close to that. I've played some really, one very difficult character that I played once, that I actually have wrote a piece about, and that was the character of Pyle, who was the Nazi kind of bureaucrat organizer of the ghetto of Lodz. He and Rumkowski had a very symbiotic relationship until the final solution comes in, and then they are now in conflict with each other because Pyle wants to keep the ghetto producing blankets and uniforms, and Rumkowski wants to save his people. And it was just very difficult for me to find that place where I could do the scenes where Rumkowski and I are at a table, and we know these things to be true. So it isn't like a made up scene. The scene is made up, but the event is true. Where they are bargaining. I've got to put 3,500 people on the train on Friday. Now let's just figure this out. And then I'm talking about putting little children on the train because they actually don't do any work. And he's going, "What, are you crazy?" And it's all this type of stuff. And I had such a difficult time finding that character because I thought of him as essentially kind of a monster, until I had this very unexpected experience. During rehearsals, I went across the street to get something to eat. The guy in front of me, it was kind of a food trucky type thing, and the guy in front of me, when he went to pay for his food, he pulled his money out, and a $5 bill fell onto the ground. And I went, "Oh, sir, you dropped this $5 bill, and here it is." And then it was my turn, and I got my sandwich, and I walked away. And all of a sudden I went, "Oh, wow. I could have done something very different. I could have put my foot forward and covered that $5 bill. He wouldn't have known, and I would have been $5 richer." And then I went, that's it. That's the clue. It's not that all of a sudden I'm playing a monster, or that Pyle thought of himself as playing a monster. It's these little moments of dishonesty that probably had started years and years before, maybe when he was a little kid, but somewhere metaphorically in his life early on, he stepped forward and covered the $5 bill. Huh. And so he started off on a path that ended up with him saying, "Look, give me the kids up until 7 years old. We'll put them on the train." And so that's the sort of work that you do as an actor, and people approach it in all sorts of different ways.
Wow.
So beyond your craft, I've heard you talk about another formative event. You and I were both challenged academically in elementary school. And
Yes.
your love of science, you had a formative moment with a book in a very interesting way. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I had gone to school. I went to a very hotsy-totsy school in Philadelphia. And when I went in, I think it's the first grade, let's call it the first grade, there were, let's say there were 60 kids in the first grade, all told, a boys' school. And they were broken up into three different sections. There was first form, second form, and third form. If you were in the first form, you were one of the smarty pants. If you were in the third form, you were a dummy. And everybody knew it. Well, what's the irony about this is that I started out in the first form, but by the time I was in fifth grade, me and about, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 or 10, whatever, other kids, we were all in third form. And we all had the same problem. We didn't know how to read. And this school had decided that they were going to teach the smarty pants of this grade, Form 1, a new way to read, which had nothing to do with phonetics. It was, sight cards and what have you. Well, that combined with now what I understand to be what dyslexia is, ended up having me flunk and then flunk again. And then finally, and flunk a grade and then flunk out of school and then finally show up at another school. So I was in trouble. I was in trouble as a kid, not the same sort of trouble that my heart goes out to these kids now. I have friends who are teachers and they're telling me that, they can't get their students, some of them can't get their homework done because they're living in cars and, not that type of trouble at all, but just academic trouble. And I went, my parents rented a cabin up in New Hampshire. And it was one of these really rainy summers. And there was a bookshelf there. And the bookshelf had all these books on it, none of which I was going to read, because when I opened the book, it was just like, I didn't even know where to start. It was just a mass of words. I just was like, oh my God. But this book happened to be, had pictures in it, and they were N.C. Wyeth pictures, the great painter and illustrator, and the book was Jules Verne's Mysterious Island, and I read that book. It took me a month to read the book. But I ended up wanting to be the person, a conglomerate of the characters in that book. They knew so much, and and the only way that they got to know that was by being, well, now we know is scientists and interested in the physical world and interested, what we call nerdy, and did the hard work of remembering as the 15-year-old all of the different deciduous trees, and on and on and on. And being able to walk along and say, oh, there's that hill is streaked with red dirt. That means there's iron ore there, and that means we will be able to smelt that. And I was overwhelmed by what it meant to have that type of information and to be able to tackle the world. And what I loved about it also is that it wasn't aspirational. It wasn't all this nonsense about believing and all this stuff, which I was already really pushing against. It was and opinions and all this stuff, which I have never really gotten too involved in. It was just about, this is what we know. This is what we think. We will, deduct through that. We will use, deductive reasoning to come to solutions. We will move forward. I just was like, God, these guys are great, and they were scientists. They were essentially science. I mean, not all of them. One was an engineer. The other was a reporter. The other was a seaman. I mean, the irony is that it set me off years later, sailing to the South Pacific, and with that sort of feeling of of adventure. So I was really taken by that book.
Mm. Let me follow up on that, because you sailed, if our research was right, from Ventura to Tahiti, right? Is that
right?
What that trip was like?
Right.
And what is that through line like? How would you even go to plan a trip like that and kind of get a slice of that adventure that you read about in that book? I mean, I can't even imagine getting on a boat to go to Catalina and standing up straight half the time, let alone out all the way out there in the Pacific Ocean.
Well, you're not really asking me how to do it, are you? Because that's about the
deciding to do it in the first place. And
the decision to do it probably stemmed from that book at 12 years old. I didn't know at the time that it would end up like that, but that book had me then fascinated. Once I could read and was willing to put up with the problems of reading and get over that somewhat, and just kept on practicing and what have you. The books that I gravitated to were books like that, Magellan, Amundsen. No, he wasn't a sailor, but an explorer. I loved to read the books about the explorers. So I loved sailing. I sailed more and more and more. My father and I had a boat, or he had a boat, and I would go on it. He sort of pooped out on that early on, but I continued. I would sail by myself down in Chesapeake Bay for 10 days at a time, which, when you're 16 years old, most kids don't want to be spending 10 days alone by themselves. So I did all of that. I'm not anywhere nearly as experienced as the sailors that I'm in touch with now. I mean, they're doing major deliveries all around the world and stuff like that. But this was, I just knew that I had to do this. And I think I left when I was, I don't know, maybe 60, 64, something like that, years old, knowing that I had a window and that it would probably have career problems attached to it, which they did. If you're off for 2 years, when you come back, nobody really cares. So, but it was more important for me to be able to do that than it was to knock off another TV show or a play.
And is it just the sense of being out on the ocean like that? I'm just curious what you take away from that ability to reflect then, because I mean, as you mentioned, you've been doing it since you were young, but it's an experience that, I mean, I've never, had to be that far out and on my own, to be able to just think about my place on our planet, let alone, what I'm going to do.
To begin with, on my trip down, there were 3 of us. So it was not, I was not alone. Mm-hmm. I know everybody kind of wanted, when they came back, they all wanted, they thought that I would come back a changed person. I learned some things. It was really on my trip, my return trip. It was me and a young man, one of my younger sons, a very good friend. who had never sailed before. He and I took that trip, and he was just terrific. He was not a sailor, but he was just terrific because we had 2 or 3 mishaps, mostly equipment failure. We changed water pump on the diesel. We lost some stay, a chain plate and stuff like that. And in this romance of the sea, at least my romance of the sea, you hope to be challenged to a point, but you don't want to die. You just want to be challenged to the point that you kind of go, man, I'm really kind of scared now. And so, we had a couple of those experiences where we had to hoof to for almost 2 days as we were trying to fix stuff. And so it was a grand trip, and I learned some things, not the least of which is celebrate your successes, however small they are. You must celebrate your successes. And there were times our drill bit, our drill ran out of battery. We could not get it to charge again. We had to get through some stainless steel to get a pin out, and we put the bit on the end of a vice grip, and by hand we turned that bit for 3 hours until my hand couldn't handle it, and I handed it to him, and then back and forth. And normally in regular life, you'd end up going, "There, done, it's done. Damn it, Jesus, it's done. Let's move on," like that. At least I would. But here you kind of go, "Oh, wasn't that great?" You have to celebrate when you're under that type of stress. You have to celebrate. At around 2:00 in the morning, and we were really getting bounced around. It was stormy weather. I said to Ray, "Hey, do you know Eddie Izzard, the comedian?" And he goes, "No." And it was like, "No." I said, "How about if you and I watch a half an hour of Eddie Izzard, just to relax, just to because it was scary, but we all learned stuff, so it was great. It was a great trip."
Well, I'd have to amend your earlier comment about you and Edmondson. I think going back to using a vice grip and a drill bit was probably your Edmondson moment about 1912 with manual drills.
There we go.
So you and I, one of the few things we share in common, besides being wonderful human beings, I hope, is we're both sons of classical musicians. And I've found as I've gotten older, I'm realizing more and more how much that affected my world outlook and my view on the arts. And I assume it's the same for you because you're still involved with that world.
Yes, I am. I'm preparing a new Peer Gynt, a new Grieg Peer Gynt to be done up in Winnipeg. I'm going to go on tour with the Curtis Institute of Music with Stravinsky's L'Histoire du Soldat for a month. So yeah, and I did many shows for the LA Phil, shows for New York Philharmonic and Montreal and Sydney and on and on and on. So I've continued to do a lot of musical shows. Yeah.
But I guess the core of my question is being raised in that environment, did it affect how you went after your acting career in any way?
I don't think it had, I don't think it affected that, other than the fact that I grew up, my father was a successful musician, and I grew up in a household where work and preparing your work was everything. We did not see him very much. I mean, he would get up. Oh, I don't know. I actually don't know exactly, but let's say he was up by 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. But he was at a rehearsal by 10:30. And then he taught at Curtis and in the all through the afternoon, and then at night would have a concert. If you would go with my father to the concert, you would leave at 6 o'clock because he would be on the stage at let's say 7 for an 8:30 concert, and he'd be practicing. And then he was always the last one to leave when the stage hands are trying to clear everything, and then he'd get home and he would make reads until 1 or 2 in the morning. So I guess the work ethic was very high.
So he was an oboist, correct?
He was an oboe player with the Philadelphia Orchestra.
Yeah, well, that's great.
I'm curious how, those experiences with orchestra and acting led you to voice acting. If there's a different method that you have to do, or a different muscle to flex there. John, my daughter is 13 and she first encountered you as Discord on My Little Pony, but now visits you every day as Q in her Star Trek Timelines video game. And I'm just curious if there's like a different type of muscle then that you have to flex to find characters without a visual.
Right. It requires a lot of imagination. I don't really consider myself a voiceover actor when I am surrounded by people who are very skilled in this area, and that's all they do. I did have the experience a number of years ago of being with solely voiceover actors at a dinner. Oh my God, it was like they were all trying out with each other their different, voices and what have you. It was a sort of schizophrenic. But you have to use your imagination quite a bit. Clearly, it's the words and the vocalization that are the only thing that you can rely upon. So that's both the good news and the bad news. I mean, it's good news because you can be dressed any way you want. You don't have to comb your hair. You do your homework the night before and you go in and you're usually there for an hour or two, whatever. And that's the end of it. If you did as much work, the same script, and if it was a film, you would be there for at least a week. So it's just all very different. But it comes down to one thing. Everything is dependent on the material. If the material is great, then it's just a joy. No matter what the medium, it's a joy to be involved. If the material is not so, then you're turning it into Shinola, and it's just makes it difficult.
So you've had an interesting relationship with the science part of science fiction. I mean, there's plenty of actors that work in science fiction programming, and I don't know that they're necessarily enthralled with or converted by their relationship with science, but you actually have, besides the things you've already talked about, hosted a number of salons, I understand, for JPL and Caltech people, which are local to both of us, which is kind of, that's a remarkable kind of 19th century Paris kind of thing, isn't it?
Yes. Sean Carroll, who I met when I went to a lecture that he assured me was going to be an entry-level lecture on, dark energy or something like that. I was just like, oh my God. At Caltech, told me about these salons that they were having. And I said, oh, I'd love to go. So I went to a couple. And then I said, my house is opened to them as well. So we had, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 maybe. I remember one of the people was there. Is it Girth? Am I pronouncing his name right? Who came up with the inflation theory?
Huh. I'm not sure.
Girth. It's a strange name. Very, very
somebody really smart. Yeah.
Really smart. We had a marvelous woman who talked about bees. I mean, we were all just enthralled, everybody there. I mean, there would be maybe about 25 or 30 people. So it's always, I love that stuff. I just love that. I listen, most of the iPads or iPods that I listen to are science iPods. In our time, one of the great pod series has a wonderful one on science.
What would you think I guess, what do you think yourself, and also what Q would think about where we are in space exploration? Right now, we talked a little bit, obviously, at the top of the show on this Artemis rocket, which Rod and I have kind of ballyhooed back and forth for a number of months. But I'm curious, just from that science perspective, like, are we where you would prefer that we would be in space, or had you hoped for more?
Well, I love the technology of it. And the application of that technology back to us, as it were, is something that's very interesting to me. The actual imagining myself physically, looking out on the landscape of the moon or Mars and maybe it's my sailing. When you go out a couple thousand miles out and you're traveling at the blistering speed of about 6 miles an hour, and you look out and you begin to read the ocean. And it's always fascinating, but there's a desolateness about it all. And so I've often wondered, well, yes, but then what happens when we get there, to actually live there? So I haven't quite reconciled myself and gotten into the fantasy of that, as much as I am enthralled by the Webb telescope. I can't, just like the Hubble, I couldn't get enough of it. I start every morning. I sit down with my coffee and I get up early so I can do some writing work, but I also sort of need to fuel up, as it were. So I sit there around 6 in the morning with coffee that my sons keep on saying is the thickness of motor oil. And I just peruse. The first thing I go to is the science section, and I just read what's going on. And I always go, oh my God, isn't that amazing? And this is what we've discovered today. And I love the other part about science, which I love, is that it changes. There's the people in this world who need, now I'm getting a little bit into religion, but, it was said, 2,000 years ago, and it's, we need, solid stuff. I love the fact that it changes. I love the fact that we know so much more than we knew 100 years ago. And I only wish that I were around 100 years from now to find out what we got all wrong, and that what and how much more yet again we know. So I love that part. I love that process.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Webb Space Telescope, and it's just the fact that they looked further, they looked harder, and they're finding all of this new stuff back to the dawn of time. It seems like right now, and
yeah, they found something. I know they found something yesterday. The earliest one, and I because where I am right now, there's a lot of turmoil and people are jumping into the room all the time. I'm going, oh my gosh, because they were saying it completely puts, the preconceptions have been, have been knocked down, and this is really new information. And then, I hear, John, we got to get going. I was like, oh, God. So I will get back to it because it's exciting. It's very exciting.
Okay, now not to go off the rails, because we rarely talk about UFOs on this show. I don't tend to be a believer, but I just have to ask a question. Now, NASA has sort of dignified this conversation by being instructed to put some money and a number of really brilliant individuals into a new study they're doing. It's only 9 months. It's about 16 people on the panel, but these are physicists, scientists, journalists, former NASA people, FAA people, and so forth. So it's a pretty dignified board to look at the question of what we now call unidentified aerial phenomenon. But they're not doing a Project Blue Book kind of, okay, what are these things? They're looking at it through the lens of, okay, how can we better study this to understand what's going on here? They're only looking at declassified material and so forth. So I guess my question for you, because you live in a very rarefied small world of people who have spent time playing extraterrestrials, and perhaps as you were looking through your scripts and preparing for your role, thinking about it, one of the questions that always comes to me is, are we interesting enough as a species? I mean, our aircraft carriers don't even fly, for God's sakes. Are we interesting enough as a species for another species, probably many hundreds of light years away, to climb into a metal can and travel all the way here to watch our battle fleets maneuver and tip cows over? It's always puzzled me a bit. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or is that just too weird a question for words?
Well, I mean, it's, insufficient evidence. I guess one thing that comes to mind. The other thing, I guess, I don't really think very much about it, except, and I've heard this before, so I'm not saying anything that's new here, but it did make an impression on me. Advanced civilizations moving on to less advanced civilizations, it's usually the less advanced civilization that doesn't do so well.
Yes.
So I'm not in a big hurry to have something or somebody show up who clearly would be an advanced civilization. I think that we might not do so well under those circumstances. So that's about as far as it goes in my thinking about it.
Well, my final question, and again, I'm asking this both of you and channeling your fictional characters. You've played an omnipotent being. We live in a very turbulent time. Got any advice for the human race?
Oh gosh.
Is that big enough?
I guess it goes back to why it was that I loved Mysterious Island.
Mm.
The problems were problems that everybody acknowledged and agreed upon and knew needed to be fixed or solutions needed to be created. And they got to it. They just did it. We have so many problems, and the majority of them can be fixed. But we just don't seem to be able to get to it. And And I mean, I'm being as non-political as possible right now, but the world of the mysterious island was such an optimistic world. And you know, when I read this morning about, well, you know, now the Republicans have the House, and what are they going to do? Well, you know, I could think of a lot of things that they could do. The least interesting is finding out what's going on with Hunter Biden or all of that other nonsense. And I just go, these people they're not solution driven. They're not problem oriented. They're just, I just go, oh my God, give me the engineer, you know, give me the sailor, give me the reporter, the 15-year-old kid of Mysterious Island who created a utopia by working together and seeing what the problems were and dealing with it. So I wish that were the case. If I could click my fingers, that's what I would wish for.
Well, I'll take that answer, and I've loved this discussion. So I want to thank you for joining us today. Where can people go to best track what you're up to and what's up next?
Well, I have a website that I rarely look at, to my son's great annoyance, and I'm actually with him for a month or so. So I'm going to deal with that. So I think it's John at. I think it's
JohnDeLancie.com, isn't it?
Is that what it is? Okay.
I think so.
JohnDeLancie.com.
We'll check and we'll put it.
Actually, this morning he said, Dad. I went, okay. So that's a way. You know, I've got these events that are coming up. The Peer Gynt up in Winnipeg, and and then also I'm doing a Star Trek cruise, which are great. They're great fun. They are great fun. We were all a little wary of it in the beginning, but we've all decided that they're great fun, and the audience loves it. So I'm doing that at the end of February, and then I go in March around the country, a number of different dates around the country. So I'm going to put all that stuff up there.
Okay, great. So well, and you're certainly experiencing the extremes of being a sailor, going from your own boat to a cruise ship. So that'll be fun.
Yes, right.
Tariq, where can we monitor your launch status?
Well, as always, I'm at space.com, and on Twitter, so long as it's there, at Tariq J. Malik. Sitting here in my New Jersey mission control with bated breath as we await the return of the Orion spacecraft from the moon. So looking very much forward to that. And thank you again for this conversation, John. It's been such a pleasure to meet you and learn about everything that has made you who you are, and the amazing performer that we all get to enjoy. So thank you for sharing all of that with us.
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
And of course, you can always peek at me at pylebooks.com, which has probably not been updated as recently as John's site, or at astromagazine.com for the magazine that I edit. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter for now, and occasionally Instagram. Don't forget to drop us a line at twit@twit.tv. That's TWIS at twit.tv. We always welcome your comments, suggestions, ideas. And we answer each of the dozens of emails we get each week, so don't be shy. New episodes of this podcast publish every Friday on your favorite podcatcher. So make sure to subscribe, tell your friends, and give us reviews, especially this episode, because it was really special. We'll take 5 stars or a thumbs up. Even if John earned it, we'll be happy to share credit. And you can always head to our website at twit.tv/TWIS. And don't forget, you can get all the great programming on the TWiT network ad-free on Club TWiT, as well as some extras that are only available there for just $7 a month, which is still cheaper than Twitter Blue. Sigh. You can also follow the TWiT Tech Podcast Network at TWiT on Twitter and on Facebook and twit.tv on Instagram. Thank you, and we will see you next week.
Hey there, I'm Micah Sargent from TWiT, and you may be asking a question. What in the world do you do if you want to thank that hard-working team of yours? Well, why not gift them a Club TWiT corporate subscription? Oh, and here's a secret. You'll be benefiting yourself too, because you will be able to keep your team informed and entertained with podcasts covering the latest in tech, so they'll always stay up to date. With a Club TWiT subscription, they're going to get access to all of our podcasts ad-free. They'll get access to the members-only Discord server where they can chat with fellow Club TWiT members and all of us here at TWiT, and exclusive shows like Hands on Mac, Hands on Windows, and the Untitled Linux Show. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit and look for corporate plans for complete details.